Okay, so the Maui wildfires, the death toll is growing by the day. I mean, it's not even worth mentioning the number of people who have died because the number is changing so quickly. Apparently, the search and rescue crews have only analyzed 3% of the burned area. So we have no idea how many people are going to die. Some of the estimates say it could be up to 500 people. God forbid, I pray that that is not accurate. But I think a lot of us are wondering what caused these wildfires, why this got out of control so quickly. I know there are a lot of theories, perhaps even conspiracy theories that are floating around online. To me, it's a little bit too early to make a definitive statement about what caused this. I think we can make a definitive statement about what did not cause this, and we'll get to that in a second. I'm, of course, talking about climate change. But one of the things that has been my biggest takeaway in watching this story unfold is that we can't trust the government to take care of us at all. They failed in the one responsibility that they had to the people of Hawaii, and that is their emergency warning system. I mean, this emergency warning system in Hawaii, you probably remember a couple of years ago, it notified people that they were going to be faced with some kind of ballistic missile. People were like, oh, we're getting nuked by Kim Jong-un. And they were like, oh, sorry, someone just hit the wrong button in the control center. This emergency system has notified the residents of Hawaii that they were facing impending disaster falsely twice in the last couple of years. And yet the one time that it really matters, the sirens didn't go off. They didn't warn people. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, and the first Wednesday of every month, there was a test of these sirens to make sure that everyone knew what they sounded like, to make sure that all the sirens were operational. The first Wednesday of every month at noon, these sirens went off for 1 minute. And no, if you were inside or outside, you were driving, you were in the basement of a building, you could hear them. And it was necessary. And so then when you were used to the sound, so then when in the summer in Ohio it was tornadoes, when there was a tornado warning or a tornado watch, you would hear these sirens. And what would you do when you hear these sirens? You would immediately, this was when I was a kid, so before iPhones, you would immediately turn on your television and see what the information was. Is it a thunderstorm? Is it a tornado? How close is it to us? What do we need to do to prepare? This is a similar system to what Hawaii's system is supposed to do. I mean, emergency response officials in Hawaii right now are trying to minimize or belittle that system, saying, well, it's not a system that's really necessary. All it does is tell residents to look up more information. Well, yeah, that information is necessary. I mean, reportedly, we don't have confirmation of these reports. And again, I pray that they're not true. But reports coming from Hawaii is that a lot of the people who have been killed by these wildfires are children, because school has not yet started and parents were at work. They left their children home. They weren't warned at work of these sirens. The children at home weren't warned. And so they didn't even know their houses were on fire until they were on fire and they died. But imagine if there had been an emergency system that had gone off, if they had gotten a text message and their phone had beeped, if they had had these sirens, they could have turned on the television, or maybe their parents could have called them or come home from work and said, hey, maybe we need to evacuate. Let's look at the information and analyze this threat for ourselves. But it didn't work. And government officials, as they're always doing, are trying to slough off the responsibility as if it wasn't their responsibility. We cannot trust the government to take care of us. And we have to rely primarily on ourselves, which I know is not the first choice of many people, sometimes including myself. But you see things like this and you're like, well, am I going to trust the government then the next time to take care of my family, or am I going to have to rely on myself? And I think the answer to that is very clear. Democrats, meanwhile, are already trying to politicize this, which is the grossest thing to me. People are dying. We don't even know how many people have been killed. We don't even know how many children have been killed, and you're already trying to use this tragedy to push your pre-existing political agenda. It's so grotesque, so grotesque. Senator Mazie Hirono went on television this weekend and blamed the wildfires, of course, on climate change. This is what she said.
Experts warn that extreme disasters such as this one are only becoming more common because climate change is fueling stronger storms, hotter temperatures, more widespread droughts. And earlier this week, President Biden incorrectly claimed he had already declared a climate emergency, which would give him additional powers to combat the climate crisis. Given what you're seeing on the ground, do you want President Biden to actually declare a climate emergency?
I think that we very, very much need to acknowledge that climate change is upon us. There are whole states, by the way, Jake, where you can't even use the words climate change because they still have a hit-in-the-sand attitude. But, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act provided some $300 billion to combat climate change and to move us away from continuing reliance on fossil fuels. Yes, there is more that needs to be done, and there will be lessons learned from this ongoing tragedy for the other counties, as well as the county of Maui. Clearly, wildfires is an occurrence in Hawaii. People don't realize that acres are burned in Hawaii as in so many other states. And in terms of the percentage of acreage burned, Hawaii is on a par with other states. There is not enough recognition that we are going to need to combat these kinds of wildfires.
Okay,
we
that's
have
enough.
situations
That's
where...
That's enough. Climate change is upon us, she said, and she blames fossil fuels. That's what she blames, fossil fuels. It's always a stupid argument. It's always untrue. It's always unscientific. But when she uses a stupid, lying, unscientific political argument in the face of tragedy to push her own, I mean, what she's essentially pushing is socialism. She doesn't want us to rely on fossil fuels, so she wants us to go back to the dark ages where we don't have antibiotics, we don't have fertilizer and pesticides, so we don't have crops, people are starving. We don't have textiles that are made from petrochemicals. She wants us to, we won't have cars, so we won't have, I guess, interstate commerce unless we have a horse and buggy or can take it on our bike. The idea that we are not going to be a society reliant on fossil fuels, I don't think a lot of, certainly Democrats, understand the physical ramifications of that policy. What would your life look like if we didn't have fossil fuels? But I would challenge every single Democrat to try to answer that question. Or maybe you and I need to go around and ask all of our friends, what would your life look like if we didn't have fossil fuels? If you didn't have a car, if you didn't have clothes, if you didn't have antibiotics, if you didn't have mass-produced food thanks to petrochemicals that allow us to grow things because of fertilizer and pesticides, et cetera, what would our life actually look like? It would be awful. There would be mass death. And yet this is what the left is constantly pushing, and they're doing it on the backs of these people who were just killed. And again, I'm not going to sit here and make any definitive statement about what caused this, what the origin was, why it was so bad. We do know from other wildfires in our country, specifically the ones that happened in California, or that happen on a regular basis in California, but I was referring specifically to the 2018-2019 wildfires in California, that oftentimes it's because of humans. It's started by humans. This is not just a random combustion that resulted in a fire that swept this island, just like it wasn't a random combustion that resulted in California in these wildfires. It's usually started by humans. And the reason that it is so damaging is because we have more buildings, we have more infrastructure in places that we know are at high risk of wildfires. In fact, there are some places in our country in California, that don't even insure buildings that are built in these high-risk areas because we already know that they are at high risk of wildfire. So usually the fires are man-made or started by human beings. They are damaging and they cost more money because the infrastructure that we build in high-risk areas, and then there hasn't been proper, oftentimes, I can't say this definitively about Hawaii yet, but we're going to look more into this. But in California, they don't do proper brush control. They don't clear away these years and years worth of dead branches and dead trees that are just like combust and make these wildfires humongous. They don't even do controlled burns anymore.
Hi guys, it's Liz Wheeler. Don't forget to watch my show, The Liz Wheeler Show, every night at 7 p.m. on the First TV. You can download the free First TV app, or you can visit thefirsttv.com/Liz and start watching today.